The memory card is on the desk in front of me, in a small clear plastic case I bought at a drugstore in 1998 because the original case had cracked and I didn't trust the hinge anymore. It's a SanDisk, 2 gigabytes, which was a lot for a trail camera card at the time. The label has my handwriting on it in fine point Sharpie that has faded to brown. Camera 4, the label says, and under that in smaller letters, 300. And under that in smaller letters still, do not reformat. I have never reformatted it. I have copied the files off it 11 times over the years, to 3 different computers and 4 different external drives, and the files are not the same on any 2 of those copies. I know how that sounds. I am going to try to explain it as plainly as I can. Next to the card is a contact sheet, printed on photo paper, 8.5 by 11, with 30 thumbnails per page, 10 pages total, 300 frames in sequence. I printed this sheet at the district office in the autumn of 1998, the week we closed the file. I printed it on a Hewlett-Packard laser that smelled like burnt dust whenever it warmed up. The print quality is poor. Every thumbnail looks roughly the same. A gravel road, a rusted swing gate across the road, white pines on either side, fog in some frames, thicker in some than others. Timestamp in the lower right corner in white pixelated numerals. No animals, no people, no vehicles. 300 photographs of nothing. That's what the report called it. Equipment malfunction, sensor fault, condensation on the PIR lens, low battery warning suppressed. The official conclusion was that the camera had false triggered 300 times between approximately 11:48 p.m. on the night of August 14, 1998, and approximately 5:32 a.m. on the morning of August 15, 1998, and that none of the images contained evidentiary value. The memory card was logged into evidence, photographed at intake, and signed back out to me 3 weeks later, when the file was closed and I was told to dispose of the card per standard practice. I did not dispose of the card. I told the clerk I had, and I put the card in my truck console, and a month later I put it in this plastic case. And it has been on a series of desks in a series of rooms in my house for the last 28 years. I want to start with the road, because the road is most of why I never let the card go. The road did not have a name, officially. On the 1971 county map, it's labeled as Forest Service Spur 14B, a logging access that ran east off County 14 about 3 miles north of the Graywater South Station and ended at an old skidder turnaround above the chain of lakes. It was gated in 1979 when the timber company that built it dissolved. The Forest Service put a swing gate across it, padlocked, with the standard yellow sign that says authorized vehicles only. By 1998, the gate was rusted nearly solid. You could still open it with effort, but the hinges screamed, and the lock had to be cut and replaced every time we needed access, which was maybe twice a year. The road past the gate ran about 1.25 miles through second-growth pine to the old turnaround, and from the turnaround a foot trail dropped down to the lake. On the 1994 topo, the spur is still labeled. On the 2003 topo, the spur is gone. The gate is still there. I have driven past it. The road behind it is still there, grown a little narrower, but there. It just isn't on the map anymore. That's the road the camera was watching. The reason we put a camera there was a missing person. I want to be careful about how I say this, because there were actually 2 cases that summer that involved that stretch of road, and the official file collapsed them into one for reasons I'll get to. The case the camera was nominally for was a man named, I'll call him Daniel, who had gone in over the gate on foot on August 9 to fish the upper lake and had not come out on August 11, as he'd told his wife he would. Daniel was 61, in reasonable health, knew that country well, had been fishing those lakes for 30 years. His wife reported him on the morning of the 12th. We went in that afternoon with a hasty team, found his truck parked at the south side of the gate, found his camp set up at the lake about 1.25 miles in, found his fishing rod broken down and stowed in its tube, found his sleeping bag damp but rolled, found his cook stove cold, found no Daniel. We searched for 2 days. We found nothing additional. No boat prints we could match. No scent the dog could hold past the camp clearing. No sign of struggle. No sign of departure on foot. His truck keys were in the cook stove pot, which is something a lot of solo campers do so they don't lose them. The keys were there. The man was not. On the 3rd day, the incident commander, a woman named Mireille, who'd come down from the regional office to take over from our district guy because he was working a fire on the other side of the park, made the decision to scale the active search back and shift to a monitoring posture. That meant flagging the area, leaving a note at his camp in case he came back, and putting trail cameras at the gate and at the lake clearing to capture any movement in or out. The theory was that if Daniel was alive and disoriented somewhere in the drainage, he might wander back to his camp or his truck. If somebody else was involved, they might come back to the camp too. Trail cameras were standard practice for this. We had a kit of about 12 of them at the district office, mostly stealth cams and 1 or 2 of the older cutbacks. I picked camera 4 out of the kit because it had fresh batteries and a clean lens, and because the strap on it was the only one not frayed. I mounted camera 4 myself on the afternoon of August 14, on a white pine about 15 feet east of the gate on the south side of the road. I want to be specific about how I mounted it, because the mounting becomes relevant later. The tree was about 18 inches in diameter. I used the camera's own nylon strap, threaded through the slots on the back of the case, and cinch it tight with the buckle at chest height, about 4 feet 6 inches off the ground. I angled the lens slightly to the northwest so that the frame would capture the gate, the first 10 or 15 yards of road behind the gate, and a bit of the brush on the north side. I checked the angle by triggering a test photo with my hand in front of the lens, then walking out into the frame and waving. The test photos came out fine. Date stamp correct, August 14, 1998. Timestamp correct, 3:47 p.m. Battery indicator full. I changed the SD card to a fresh one, the SanDisk that is on my desk now, and I closed the case and snapped the latches and I left. I came back the next morning, August 15, at about 9 a.m. I came back early because Marie had radioed me at the cabin at around 6 a.m. to tell me that a second person had been reported missing overnight, a woman named, I'll call her Ray, 28 years old, who had told her boyfriend she was going for an evening run on the old fire road that runs parallel to 14, about a half-mile west of the gate. She hadn't come home. The boyfriend had driven the fire road at midnight looking for her, hadn't seen her car, had assumed she'd gone to a friend's, had called around at 5 a.m. and found nobody had seen her, and had called us at 5:45. Mireille wanted the camera card pulled early in case either Daniel or Ray, or anyone connected to them, had moved through that gate overnight. I drove up to the gate at 9 a.m. I want to describe what I saw when I got there because it is the first thing in this case that didn't fit, and I noticed it before I ever looked at the card. The camera was still mounted, the strap was tight, the case was closed, the latches were latched, the lens was clean, there was no condensation, although there had been heavy fog overnight per the weather report, and the duff under my boots was soaked. The battery indicator, when I opened the case, showed full. The exposure counter showed 300. 300 is the maximum the card was set to before overwriting. The camera had triggered 300 times overnight and then stopped because the card was full. The gate was closed. The padlock I had cut and replaced 2 days earlier was hanging on the hasp, locked, exactly as I'd left it. There were no fresh boot prints in the soft dirt on either side of the gate. There were no tire marks on the road behind the gate. There was no broken brush. There was no sign that anything had moved through that gate, on foot or otherwise, between when I'd mounted the camera and when I came back. I pulled the SD card and put it in the field case in my vest pocket. I left the camera mounted with a fresh card because Mireille wanted it left running. I drove back to Incident Command at the South Station, and I put the card in the reader on the laptop, and I started looking at the images. The first image was the one I expected. 11:47 p.m., gate closed, road empty, light fog. The infrared flash on a stealth cam from that era had a particular look, a flat greenish wash with a bright hot spot in the center of the frame. The first image was perfectly normal. The second image was time-stamped 2 seconds later, 11:47 p.m. Gate closed, road empty, fog very slightly thicker. The third image was 11:48 p.m. Gate closed, road empty. The fourth was 11:48 p.m. Gate closed, road empty. The fifth was 11:49 p.m. The sixth was 11:49 p.m. The seventh was 11:50 p.m. I scrolled through 20 of them. They were all the same image, or as near to the same image as makes no difference. Gate, road, fog. The fog moved very slightly between frames, but it was the kind of movement you might attribute to the camera's exposure variation rather than to actual movement of vapor. No animal, no person, no vehicle. The timestamps marched forward at 1 to 2 minute intervals for the first 10 frames, then settled into a steadier rhythm of 1 frame every minute or so. I scrolled faster. Frame 50, frame 100, frame 150, the same image, or what looked like the same image, over and over, with the timestamps creeping forward. The fog thickened and thickened again. The gate stayed closed. The road stayed empty. The brush did not move. I called Mireille over. She watched me scroll for about a minute, and then she said, "Bad sensor." I said, "Maybe." She said, "What else triggers a PIR 300 times without anything in the frame?" Temperature differential, fog density shift, insect on the lens. Battery getting flaky, I said. Battery's full. She said, "Battery is showing full this morning. Might have dipped overnight and recovered," I said. "Sensor's not wet," she said. "Could have been wet at midnight, dry by morning." I said, "Yeah. I want to be clear about Mireille. She was not a hostile commander. She was not somebody who covered things up out of malice. She was a tired, competent woman in her 50s who had run 100 operations and who had a missing fisherman and now a missing runner on her board, and who needed her people looking at the lake and the fire road, not at 300 identical photographs of an empty gate. She gave the most reasonable explanation a reasonable person would give. I gave it back to her. We both agreed it was probably the sensor. I copied the files off the card onto the Incident Command laptop in a folder labeled CAM04081498. And I went out to help with the search. We searched for Ray for 4 days. We searched for Daniel as a secondary objective. We found Ray's car on the morning of August 17, parked on a turnout on the fire road, half a mile west of the gate, keys in the ignition, water bottle in the cup holder, running shoes missing. We found one of her shoes in a drainage about 3/4 of a mile northeast of her car, between the fire road and the closed service spur. The shoe was on the south side of a small creek. There were no prints in the soft mud of the creek bank. The shoe was clean, no blood, laces still tied in a double knot. The dog handler, a man named Chris, walked the dog from the shoe in every direction for an hour and got nothing. Chris said the dog kept circling back to a particular spot about 30 yards uphill from the shoe and lying down. Chris said in 8 years of handling he had never had this particular dog lie down on a job. The dog was a 6-year-old Belgian Malinois named Beck. I knew Beck. Beck did not lie down. We did not find Ray. We did not find Daniel. By August 22, the active search was scaled to a recovery posture, which is what it's called when nobody is saying the word body yet, but everyone knows what they're looking for. The cameras stayed up until September 4. Camera 4 took another 1,400 and some photos over those 3 weeks. All but 6 of them were of an empty road. The 6 that weren't were 3 deer, 1 raccoon, and 2 of Mireille's truck as she came up to swap the card. The 6 normal photos are normal photos. Deer, raccoon, truck. Time-stamps reasonable. Behavior of the animals reasonable. The deer turn their heads. The raccoon ambles across the frame. The truck headlights come around the bend. But the night of August 14 to 15 was 300 photos of nothing. I want to describe what I started noticing on the second pass through those photos, which I did about a week after I copied them off the card, in the back room of the district office, with the door closed after my shift. The fog moved. I had told Mireille the fog moved very slightly, the way you'd expect from exposure variation. That isn't what I saw on the second pass. On the second pass, I started picking out specific bands of fog and tracking them frame to frame. There were what I'd call layers in the fog, thicker patches at about waist height that drifted across the road in slow streams. In some sequences of frames, those layers move from left to right across the frame, the way you'd expect from a light breeze coming off the lake. In other sequences, they moved from right to left. In 2 sequences, they moved in both directions in the same frame, with one layer going one way and a layer 2 feet below it going the other. The weather report for that night says calm winds under 3 miles per hour with patchy ground fog. Calm winds don't run 2 directions at once. There was a shadow, not a clear shadow, nothing you would point at and say there's a man standing there. But in about 40 of the frames, there was a dark patch on the road surface in roughly the same position, just to the right of the gate, in the gravel. It wasn't there in the first frame. It wasn't there in the last frame. It was there in frames 60-ish through 100, gone for a while. Back in frames 150 through 180, gone again. The shape of it changed, slightly, between frames. It wasn't shadow from a tree, because the trees in the frame don't cast there. It wasn't shadow from a cloud, because infrared flash doesn't pick up cloud shadow. It was a patch of darker gravel that came and went. I told myself it was moisture. Wet gravel looks darker in IR. The fog could have been depositing dew unevenly. That's what I told myself, the gate. This is the one I am going to take my time with, because this is the one I cannot explain. In the first frame, the gate is closed. Padlock visible on the hasp on the right side. Yellow sign visible on the crossarm. Gate angled exactly perpendicular to the road, which is how I'd left it. In frame 73, the gate is open. The crossarm is swung back along the south side of the road, parallel to the brush. The padlock is not visible. The yellow sign is angled away from the camera. In frame 74, taken approximately 1 minute later by the timestamp, the gate is closed again. Padlock visible, sign visible, perpendicular to the road. In frame 75, also 1 minute later, closed. In frame 112, open again. In frame 113, closed. There are 9 frames out of 300 in which the gate is open. Each of them is preceded and followed by frames in which the gate is closed. There is no frame in which the gate is in the process of being opened or closed. It is either closed or it is open. Nothing moves it. Nobody is in the frame to move it. The fog patterns in the open gate frames are different from the fog patterns in the closed gate frames immediately adjacent, in ways that don't make sense if these frames were taken seconds or minutes apart at the same location. I want to say also that when I went back to the gate on August 16 to swap the card, The padlock had a fresh scratch across the face of it that had not been there when I'd installed it. The padlock was locked. The gate was closed. The scratch was about an inch long, diagonal, the kind of mark you'd get from sliding a key across the face of the lock in the dark when you couldn't see the slot. I noted the scratch in my field book. The note is in my field book still. It is not in the official file. There is more. Frame 156 shows a piece of orange flagging tape tied to a branch of a young pine on the north side of the road, about 20 feet behind the gate. There was no flagging tape on that branch when I mounted the camera. There was no flagging tape on that branch when I returned to swap the card the next morning. There was no flagging tape on that branch when the search team eventually expanded the search area into that section of forest 3 days later and started placing their own flagging. The first flag we placed on that branch was placed on the afternoon of August 17 by a SAR volunteer named, I don't remember her last name, by a young woman from the volunteer team. I watched her tie it. She tied it in a girth hitch, which is what the volunteers were taught. The flag in the photograph, frame 156, August 15, 1998, 2:34 a.m., is tied in a clove hitch. I tie a clove hitch. I taught the SAR volunteers to use a girth hitch because it doesn't bind on the bark and is easier to remove. The flag in that photograph is tied the way I tie a flag. On a branch I would not flag for another 2 days. In a frame from the night before any flagging existed in that area at all. I did not point this out to Mireille. I told myself the flag in the photograph was probably an artifact, a piece of orange leaf or a streak of dust on the sensor. I looked at the frame closely. It wasn't an artifact. It was a flag with a knot, my knot. I want to talk about frame 218 now, because frame 218 is the reason I am recording this, and I have been talking around it for 45 minutes because I do not enjoy talking about it. Frame 218 is timestamped 3:51 a.m., August 15, 1998. On the contact sheet on my desk, it looks like all the others. Gate closed, road empty, fog moderate. In the digital file as it exists on my external drive today, it looks like all the others. Gate closed, road empty, fog moderate. In the digital file as it existed on the incident command laptop on the night of August 22, 1998, when I sat down alone with the laptop after Mariel had gone to bed in the bunk room, and I had a cup of coffee from the thermos, and I went through the 300 frames one at a time with the brightness on the laptop turned up and my reading glasses on. Frame 218 had a person in it. The person was standing in the middle of the road, behind the gate, about 30 feet back. They were facing the camera. They were tall. They were wearing what looked like a dark jacket and dark pants, although in the greenwash of the infrared, it was hard to tell colors. They were not blurred. They were not partial. They were a person, standing still, looking at the lens. The IR flash had caught their eyes, and the eyes were two bright points, the way deer eyes go when a flash hits them. But the spacing of the eyes was human, and the height of the face was human, and the proportions of the body were human, and they were standing in the middle of the road on a night when nothing had passed through the gate. I looked at that frame for what I would guess was 10 minutes. I went forward to 219, empty road. I went back to 217, empty road. I went to 218, person. I went forward, back, back. The person was in 218. I zoomed in on the laptop. The zoom on those old image viewers was crude, but I could see the figure clearly enough. They had their arms at their sides. Their head was tilted very slightly, like somebody looking at something they were trying to understand. They were standing on the patch of darker gravel I had been noticing in the other frames. They had the patch under their boots. I want to tell you what I did next, because what I did next is the thing I have not forgiven myself for. I did not call Mireille. I did not wake the technician who was sleeping in the back office. I did not take a screenshot. I did not print the frame. I did not save a copy to a separate folder. I sat there with that frame on the laptop screen, and I looked at it. And I thought about Daniel's wife, who I had spoken to on the phone twice, who was 60 years old, and who had asked me, very quietly, on the second call, whether her husband was the kind of man who could survive a week alone in the woods at his age. And I had said yes, although I had not been sure, and I thought about Ray's boyfriend, who had been at the South Station that morning, trying to be useful and who had taken a sandwich from the cooler and not eaten it. And I thought about what it would mean to call Mireille over and show her a photograph of a man, possibly Daniel, possibly someone else, standing in the road, behind a locked gate at 4 a.m, in a frame from a camera that had triggered 300 times overnight, without anything moving in front of it. And I thought about what Mireille would have to do with that information. She would have to reopen the active search. She would have to call in a second hasty team. She would have to put rangers and volunteers back into the woods, in the dark, at night, looking for a man who had appeared in one photograph out of 300 and who was not present in any other frame, and who could not have been at that location because nothing had moved through that gate, and because the dog hadn't held a scent past the camp, and because the gravel did not have a footprint, and because the brush behind the gate had not been touched. And I thought about how, if I called Mireille, and we reopened, and we put people back in, and we found nothing, and somebody got hurt on the night search, I would be the man who had put them in there on the basis of one frame from a malfunctioning camera. And I thought about how, if I called Mireille, and we reopened, and we found Daniel, alive somewhere up the drainage, the photograph would not have been why we found him. We would have found him because we kept searching, which Mireille had already decided we were going to do at a reduced posture for another week, regardless. And I thought about how, if I called Mireille and we found Daniel dead, the photograph would not have helped him either. I told myself I was thinking practically. I told myself I was protecting the team, and the family, and the integrity of the investigation. I told myself I would mention it to Mireille in the morning when I had slept on it. That is not what I did. What I did was I closed the file. I closed the laptop. I went to the bunk room. I did not sleep. I lay on my back on the cot and I listened to Mireille, breathing 2 cots over and the lift generator running outside and the wind in the pine. And I told myself, over and over, that the person in the frame was a sensor artifact, a flash, reflection off fog, a pareidolia, a trick my tired eyes had played on a green-washed infrared exposure at 1 a.m. By the time the sun came up, I had almost convinced myself. I went back to the laptop at 7 a.m. before Mireille was up, and I opened the file. Frame 218, empty road. I want to be precise about this. The file had not been altered. The folder modification date on the directory had not changed. The image was the same file I had opened the night before. I had not deleted it, copied over it, or modified it. The thumbnail was the same. The file size was the same to the byte. The image, when I opened it, no longer had a person in it. It had a gate, a road, and fog. The patch of darker gravel was there. The figure was not. I went back and forth. Frame 217, frame 218, frame 219, all three the same. Empty road, fog, gate, nothing. I sat there for a while. I drank some coffee. I went back through the whole sequence. I looked for the figure in every frame. I did not find it. The other anomalies were still there. The gate was still open in 9 frames and closed in the others. The fog still moved in contradictory directions. The flag was still tied to the branch in frame 156. The patch of dark gravel still came and went. But the figure was gone. I told myself at that point that I had imagined it, that I had been tired, that the laptop screen at low brightness in a dim back office at midnight was not a reliable viewing condition, that I had wanted to see something, because I wanted Daniel found, and I had projected a shape onto a band of dense fog. I went to find Mireille. I told her the camera files looked, on second review, like equipment malfunction. I told her the sensor was probably wet, and the camera had triggered on temperature shifts in the fog. I told her there was nothing in the frames worth pulling from the file. She nodded. She said, "Thanks. I'll have the technician write it up." The technician wrote it up. The folder was labeled non-evidentiary. The contact sheet went into the appendix. The card was logged into evidence with a note that the 300 images were null. 3 weeks later, after the case was reclassified from active to monitoring, the card was signed back out to me for disposal. I did not dispose of it, and here is the part I have not yet said, which is the reason I started this recording, and which I am going to say now, because if I stop here, I will turn the machine off and put it in the drawer with the others and not come back. In 2009, I had a stroke, a small one on the left side that left me with some weakness in my right hand and some trouble with the names of things for about a month afterward. While I was recovering, I had a lot of time in the house and not much to do, and one afternoon, I got the card out and I put it in a USB card reader on the laptop my daughter had set up for me before she went home, and I opened the folder. I had not looked at the files since 2003, when I'd done a 5th or 6th copy onto a new external drive. Frame 218 had a person in it. The figure was standing in the middle of the road, behind the gate, about 30 feet back, facing the camera, tall, dark jacket, dark pants, eyes catching the IR flash as 2 bright points, the patch of darker gravel under their boots, the head tilted very slightly, the way somebody tilts their head when they're trying to understand what they're looking at. I sat at the kitchen table and I looked at that frame for a long time. I went forward to 219, empty road. I went back to 217, empty road. I went to 218, person. I zoomed in. The zoom on the modern viewer was much better than the zoom on the 1998 viewer, and I could see things in the figure that I had not been able to see on the incident command laptop. I could see that the jacket had a zipper. I could see that the figure was wearing boots, not running shoes. I could see that the figure was a man. I could see, although I am less sure about this part, the shape of a beard. Daniel had a beard. I knew this from the photograph his wife had given us. Daniel wore a green canvas jacket, which would have read as dark in IR. Daniel wore boots when he fished, not running shoes. The figure in the frame was a man with a beard and a dark jacket and boots, standing in the middle of a closed-service road at 3:51 a.m. on the morning after he disappeared, looking at a camera I had mounted that afternoon on a tree 15 feet away. I printed the frame. I have the printout. It is in the drawer in this desk, in an envelope, with a note clipped to it that says recovered 2009, do not reformat card. I have not shown the printout to anyone. I have copied the file off the card 3 more times since 2009, onto 3 different drives. The figure is in the file on 2 of those drives. It is not in the file on the 3rd. I do not know what determines whether the figure is in the file on a given copy. I have tested this. I have copied the same source file from the same card on the same day to 2 adjacent USB sticks and opened them both, and on one stick the figure is in the frame, and on the other stick the road is empty. The file sizes are identical. The checksums when I ran them were identical, although I do not trust myself to have run them correctly because I am not a computer person, and I learned about checksums from a tutorial my son-in-law sent me. I am going to stop trying to explain that part. I am 69 years old, and I do not understand how a digital file behaves the way that file behaves. I am simply telling you that it does. There are two more things I have to say, and then I am going to stop. The first is what I noticed about frame 218 on the printout I made in 2009, which I did not notice on the laptop screen in the back office in 1998. On the printout, behind the figure, well behind him, deep in the road, almost at the limit of what the IR flash reaches, there is a second shape. It is much fainter. It is not a person. I do not know what it is. It is taller than the figure of the man, by perhaps a third again as much. And it is narrower, and it has no clear feature except a kind of vertical line that runs from where its head would be down to the road surface. I could not tell you with any confidence whether it is a thing standing on the road, or a defect in the image, or a streak of fog caught in a particular way by the flash. I have looked at it for a great deal of time. I have shown the printout to my own eyes in many different lights. The vertical line is always there. It does not change between viewings the way the figure of the man changes between copies. The tall thing is consistent. The man in the road is looking at the camera. The tall thing behind him is, as best I can tell, looking at him. The second thing is something that happened last year. My old district office, the one in the South Station, was closed in 2018, and the records were transferred to the regional archive. In 2024, a researcher contacted me. She said she was a graduate student working on a project about wildlife camera methodology in the late 1990s, and that she had come across a reference to Camera 4 in a footnote in a procurement document, and was trying to track down the original images. She said the case file no longer contained the contact sheet that the original report mentioned. She said the digital files referenced in the chain of custody were not on the archive drive. She said she had spoken to Mireille, who was in a memory care facility in Duluth, and who had told her very clearly that she remembered the case, and remembered that there had been 300 photographs, but that she could not remember what was in them, because, she said, she had asked me what was in them, and I had told her the camera was broken, and she had trusted me, because I was a good ranger, and she had not looked at the photographs herself. I did not tell the researcher that I have the card. I did not tell her about frame 218. I told her that I was sorry, but the photographs had been routine, equipment failure, that I remembered them as unremarkable. She thanked me and said she might call back if she had more questions. She has not called back. I do not know if she will. I have thought often, in the year since she called, about what I would have done if she had asked me directly. I do not know. I do not know if I have the courage to give the card to a stranger. I'd not know if I have the courage to give it to my own daughter. I do not know if the figure would be in the frame when she opened it, or if the road would be empty. And I do not know which of those outcomes I am more afraid of. Daniel was never found. Ray was never found. The case files for both of them are still listed as open inactive at the regional office. Daniel's wife passed in 2011. Ray's boyfriend, last I heard, moved to Oregon and remarried. The service road behind the gate is no longer on the map. The gate is still there. The white pine I mounted camera 4 on is still there. I drove out that way in 2019, on my way back from a fishing trip up north, and I parked at the gate, and I got out, and I looked at the tree. The strap mark from the camera is still visible on the bark, a faint horizontal compression in the cambium where the nylon cinched in for a month in 1998. The mark is at chest height, about 4 feet 6 inches off the ground on the south side of the tree, facing the road. I did not walk past the gate. I did not put a hand on the padlock. I stood at the road for about 10 minutes, and I listened, and the forest sounded the way a forest is supposed to sound, birds and wind, and the small constant noise of insects in late summer, and I got back in my truck and I drove home. The card is on the desk. The contact sheet is on the desk. The printout is in the drawer. I am going to put this recording with them. I am not going to make a copy of the file for this recording. I am not going to attach the printout to anything I send anywhere. If somebody finds these things when I am gone, they will find them together, and they can do with them what they decide to do. I want to say one last thing, and then I am going to stop. A friend of mine, a man I worked the lookouts with in the early 80s, recorded something not long ago, a private case log of his own, about a search in the northern sector of Greywater in 1994. He sent me a copy of the recording last spring, after his wife passed and he started, I think, putting his affairs in order. I listened to it once. I have not listened to it again. In his recording, he describes a piece of orange flagging tape that appeared on a tree in an old-growth stand during a search, tied in a knot that he recognized as his own, on a tree he had not flagged, in a place where no flag should have been. He says he took the tape down and put it in a coffee can on his shelf, and that it is still there. He describes the knot as a clove hitch, the flag in frame 156 of my contact sheet, on the branch of the young pine on the north side of the road behind the gate at 2:34 a.m. on August 15, 1998, in a place no flag had been placed and would not be placed for another 2 days, is tied in a clove hitch. It is not the same forest. It is the same forest. It is not the same case. The cases are 40 miles apart and 4 years apart, and have nothing to do with each other except the knot, and except that both of us were rangers, and except that both of us tied our flags the same way, the way we were taught at the same training in 1981 by the same instructor, an old man named Wendell, who died in 1996, and whose own field notebooks, I have been told, were lost in the same basement flood that took my friend's original search files. I do not know what to do with that. I have not figured out what to do with that. I am going to turn the machine off now and put it in the drawer. The card is on the desk. The figure is in the frame, or it isn't, depending on which copy you open. The tall thing behind him is always there. The gate is still closed. The road is still empty. 300 photographs of nothing, and one of them sometimes has a man in it. I should have said something then. I am saying it now.